Sooner or later, every niche movement or community becomes so esoteric and strange and requires so much knowledge to enter that it's almost guaranteed that some sort of reform movement will come in to bring everyone back down to earth. Just think of any sort of online fandom whose unique language and references become incomprehensible to somebody who isn't familiar with the characters or events being described. Or on a more serious note, you can think of religious movements, fundamentalist Protestant groups that were designed to bring the church back to the most basic form, far away from the pageantry of the old rite. Today, we're discussing a similar reformer, but this time in the world of experimental post-war jazz. Today, we're talking about Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers with their landmark hard bop masterpiece, Moanin. Art Blakey started his career in New York City playing alongside Thelonious Monk, Dizzy Gillespie, and Charlie Parker, all men who were iconic within the world of bebop jazz. Bebop evolved out of mainstream jazz in the 1940s as a more harmonically complicated, faster-paced, more solo-heavy version of existing jazz styles. However, bebop would never really catch on as a mainstay of casual jazz listeners, much in the same way that technical death metal never really caught on as a mainstay of casual rock listeners. You see, bebop was always a form of musicians' music, something which becomes significantly more interesting and appreciated the more that you understand the playing from the musician's perspective. If you've ever heard a guitar player gush about this or that solo on a death metal song, or a drummer gush about this or that time signature in a progressive rock song, you already kind of know what I'm talking about. Of course, when that friend sits you down and explains those things to you, and then you go back and listen to the song, you share in some of their appreciation. But it's unlikely that that song will suddenly become one of your favorites that you've ever heard. However, just like all of these other niche genres of musicians' music, listeners of bebop have a disproportionate influence on the scene at large since they're disproportionately very talented musicians, which means you see influence from bebop come up all over the music world. And unsurprisingly, by the 1950s, a form of snobbery had kind of developed around bebop in the same way that metal snobs feel about other kinds of rock music. Bebop was a form of sophisticated urban high art, while blues was the music of the rural peasantry. But it's of course important to note that both of these subgenres shared the bottom rung of America's racial hierarchy. And to a majority of white listeners, and therefore a majority of American institutions, both of these forms of music would be seen as low class for completely bigoted reasons. So bebop took over the jazz world in the 1940s, and the 1950s saw a wide range of reactions to this takeover. Responses like hard bop, which maintained bebop's breakneck pace and quick chord changes while simplifying harmonies and shortening solos. The fact of the matter is, the world was moving on to simpler, more aggressive sounds like R&B and rock and roll, and jazz had to scramble to keep commercially afloat and to keep stylistically fresh. And Art Blakey took one of the boldest steps towards that hard bop future, pulling simpler chords and catchy hooks from R&B. The formerly minuscule head of bebop tracks was expanded, the head being that part where everyone for the most part plays in unison. It's basically anything that isn't time allocated to solos in a song. And solos were distributed more evenly throughout the ensemble. On this album, we even get a few killer bass solos. As someone with an extremely modest background in experiencing jazz from the player's point of view, I agree with Art Blakey's writing philosophy on this record. Firstly, those expanded chorus sections, or head sections, immediately jump off the page on every song on the record, and each conveys a simple yet affecting melody which is similar to that of a blues song. Secondly, those shorter solo sections with less intense chord progressions may not allow quite as much latitude for the musician's self-expression, but those limitations force these musicians to express those same emotions more succinctly. Because it's not like Blakey went out and found a bunch of second-rate guys to create this album. This exact same group of musicians could have made an absolutely killer bebop album if they wanted to. Instead, across this album, they give us melodies which feel very transferable to the human voice, a quality which isn't required to make instrumental music relatable, but it definitely doesn't hurt. So where does that frantic energy that we associate with bebop go when we transfer over to hard bop? It's true that here we're decreasing the anxious tension of sour notes and design dissonance, but the tragedy of the blues appears in its place, that wailing sorrow which seemingly resonates with everyone from every corner of the world. And that carries all the same, if not more, emotional valence, maybe trading some of that anxiety out for depression, but still keeping neuroticism at a high level. But just like with bebop, you can tell that this style emerged from the bustling East Coast megalopolis. The muggy heat of the subway, the rush of aggressive traffic, the overstimulation of an unfathomable variety of cultures, it's all here. And it's aided by that essential contrast between lightning-fast tempos and a swung meter. And this contrast just makes the music click into place in our minds as something satisfying and affecting, memorable, and re-listenable. So yeah, hardcore jazz heads may at first react dismissively to the aims of hard bop, feeling like it's somehow watering things down. But in the process of adopting influences from the blues, a form even older, more storied, and as emotionally affecting as jazz, hard bop found a way for jazz to dip back into the well of its own past and reinvent itself. And while we can always find a way to paint ourselves into the dense canvas of post-war jazz, never has this task felt more natural than with Art Blakey's brand of hard bop. As the city continues with its frantic energy around us, we get that feeling of being lonely in a crowd, being stuck out in the cold while we watch into a warm room buzzing with activity. The good times will always leave some of us behind, and the melancholy that brings is sometimes even harder to bear than when all of us suffer together.